Welcome to Let's Chat. My name is Jim Parker. I've been helping people buy and sell businesses for nearly 25 years. This is the show for business brokers, buyers, and sellers of businesses. We talk to attorneys, CPAs, and other specialists to pick their brain on how to do our jobs better as business brokers, or if you're a buyer and a seller of a business, to give you a better understanding of what you can expect during the process. Today, I have with me Tammy Roberts from Live Oak Bank. And we are going to be talking about how to speed up the SBA lending process once you get a deal going. How you doing today, Tammy?
I'm doing pretty good for a Monday, that's for sure.
There you go. That sounds great. I'm so glad to have you on the show again, Tammy. You're always on the show a lot. That's because I think very highly of you. You're extremely good at what you do, and you're extremely knowledgeable, and I just really appreciate you always taking out so much time to give us business brokers more insight on what to expect.
Oh, thanks, Jim. I love working with you, so it's always a pleasure.
Well, that's fantastic. Well, I'm excited about this topic, Tammy, because a lot of people think that SBA loans take a long time. To me, 80% of the deals that I do have SBA loans involved. So I've become accustomed to it, and
Hmm.
I think that we've kind of got the process down and it goes pretty smoothly. But for brokers that are not as familiar with the SBA lending process or program, or for buyers and sellers that might be listening to this, just wanted to today touch on some things that can help people kind of speed that process up.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. Absolutely. I have a feeling, sorry to interrupt. So, do you feel like there's some cyclicality with how often SBA loans are used versus like cash buyers and private equity? You would know that you've been doing this for so long. Do you see the ebbs and flows as to when people go more toward a lending route, or you're seeing more cash buyers depending on what's going on in the economy?
yeah, going on in the economy, I don't know. I can tell you, like right off the bat, and I thought you were going to go a different way. So let me kind of
Haha.
answer that, and then I'll circle back around. But typically when a business is going to sell for a half a million to $2 or $3 million, that is almost always a target for SBA lending. When you get into the $3 or $4 or $5 million mark, that can either go SBA lending, or we're looking at private equity groups, things
Hmm.
like that. Under 500,000, business selling for a couple $100,000, that's usually an all cash deal or cash with some owner financing typically.
Hmm.
As far as the economy goes, I don't really see how the economy affects what somebody's going to do one way or the other. If we're in that target mark of, the business is going to sell for half a million to a couple $1 million, no matter how the economy is doing, they're probably still going to be going the SBA route. That's what I've seen. What about
Hmm.
you, the lending
Uh,
standpoint?
yeah, I feel like I don't know if it has as much to do with the economy or to your point, the deal size. Definitely, I see a lot of the smaller ones, they're cash buyers or a majority of seller financing. I think you're right. Our sweet spot in the SBA piece is anywhere from a million to 10, because you can go over the cap of the 5 million depending on what you're doing. So yeah, I feel like you're spot on with that. It's typically the deal size that will drive that, as far as what I could tell.
Yeah, and right now we are in, the highest interest rates that we've seen in many, many years. But,
Hmm.
you're buying a business that's cash flowing
Hmm.
that, like you as a lender, you're making sure when you're looking at that loan that it's cash flowing, that they can make those payments back to the lender, as well as, be able to support themselves moving forward. So this isn't like you're just buying a house and you're paying high interest rates.
Hmm.
You're buying a business that's cash flowing, that's able to pay off that loan and give you some money back as a seller.
Hmm.
So, obviously we would all like to see the loans, the interest rates a little bit lower, and hopefully they'll start to decline over the next few years. But if you're in the market to buy a business, you shouldn't wait till interest rates drop. You might be losing out on some great business
Yeah,
opportunities.
yeah. And if it cash flows today, imagine when the rates do drop, it's just going to be an even better business.
Exactly, exactly. So let me start off by saying, why does the SBA loan closing process always seem so complex, and how does it take a village, let's just say, to kind of, get a deal done?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's almost like the great paper chase, right? Like I've seen that on so many of our resources at Live Oak, that we use. And it is true, right? The biggest piece I feel that people think is so cumbersome about an SBA loan, especially when it gets to closing, is we've already provided a lot of documentation through the process, right? We provided a lot of documentation through the underwriting process, which is standard on any loan that you're going to do, right? All banks are going to do their due diligence. And now we're getting to closing, and everybody's so excited. And then you get a long checklist of items that are still needed.
Yeah.
And it's, but they're all necessary items. It's insurances, it's stock purchase agreements, asset purchase agreements. But it seems like a very daunting. You get that checklist, and you're like, oh no, now we have all this work to do still. And honestly, when I look at a checklist, I tend to look at it in compartmentalize it. Okay, like this big long laundry list, this is all insurance stuff. Insurance, one item, right? It's probably your liability, your workers' comp. It's all, things that you can, okay, I can do this in one phone call, right? So I tell my folks all the time, compartmentalize it. It looks like a long list, but we're itemizing everything. So don't be intimidated by the list. I feel like it's just a little bit more documentation that the SBA does require as opposed to a conventional loan, simply because it's a different type of loan, and it's got a lot of benefits to it, but there's a little bit more work to it. And typically in an acquisition, you've got your agreements, your attorneys, you've got to collect different items, that you wouldn't necessarily collect in a conventional loan, because a lot of conventional loans that are used for acquisitions for small business, and probably more on a larger scale. But it's just a little bit more documentation. But the key to making it work and being quicker at it is communication.
Yeah. Very true.
Communication often and with all parties. Exclude one party out of the transaction because you feel like, okay, this person has gotten me where I needed to be already, so I don't need that person. Everybody working together is the village, right? And that's me, that's you, the borrower, the seller, the seller's broker if they have a different broker, all attorneys, the bank's attorney, the seller's attorney, the buyer's attorney. It's everybody working together. And,
CPAs, yeah.
yeah, absolutely. The CPA, just because he did your due diligence for you doesn't mean that, he's done, his job is done or his work is done. It's not until we all sign on the dotted line, right? So I think that's where, we're always chasing paper. But I feel like if you have a good process and you are communicating, that daunting checklist really becomes just another piece of getting to the finish line. And we break it down, we look at it in sections. We have, okay, this is your job, this is your job, this is your job, right? Because on the checklist, it does have all of those things, right? It will have what the attorneys need to do, what the CPA needs to do, what broker needs to do, what the lender needs to do. So, but what we don't ever want is when the customer gets, or the client or the borrower gets the checklist, they think they have to do all of it. So I think it's helpful to break it off into sections. And it's basically a, hey, this is your job, this is your job, and this is your job. And then I feel like that's where the village piece comes in, and everybody knows the players right from the beginning.
Right, right. And at the end of the day, I mean, I guess I just don't think it's that much. I mean, it's a lot of paperwork, but it's not that much. I mean, they're borrowing a couple $1 million, for instance, and they're borrowing a lot of money for a business, and it's kind of like from a buyer's perspective, it's kind of like, not that a bank's doing the due diligence, they shouldn't be doing the due diligence at all, but the bank's having their eyes on it. They want to make sure that it's a good loan from their perspective
Mm-hmm.
and a good loan from the buyer's perspective. The attorney's going to be reviewing it from a judgment lien search type of a situation.
Mm-hmm.
There is a lot to do and a lot of paperwork, but at the end of the day, I don't think it's that much. And we're so lucky that we have SBA loans in this country. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
buyers can come in and buy a business for 10% down.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of other countries, they don't have any kind of program like this. It helps the economy as a whole. It helps the buyer get into a great businesses with very little money down. It allows the seller to exit the business. And if without the SBA lending, we would not be able to sell nearly as many businesses as we are doing right now. And I kind of look at it as, Tammy, like, I guess if you're a buyer and a seller, I guess because me and you, we're in this process every day.
Yeah.
80% of the deals that I do are SBA loans when I'm selling businesses, and you're an SBA lender, so 100% of what you do is SBA. So we kind of live this day in and day out. But for those buyers and sellers that are not, this is the first time that they're seeing it, shouldn't feel overwhelmed because we kind of take it through stages, don't we? It's kind of like,
Absolutely.
hey, this is what we're going to need now, and then, a couple weeks later, okay, well, now we're going to need this kind of information, and now we're going to need this. And it's kind of like we're slowly building a puzzle,
Yeah.
we're starting out building the frame around it, and then we're filling in those pieces. And there's, like you said, there's so many different people in that village
Hmm.
that are helping us get to that situation, that it's not lying all on the buyer's shoulders or shoulders. And if you got a seasoned, experienced SBA lender like yourself and a good quality business broker, they're going to walk you through the entire process. The one thing I think is you do need to know up front is the pros and cons of SBA lending. And when a buyer reaches out to you, I'm sure you walk them through that, things that they can expect,
Hmm.
throughout the process. But yeah, don't, well, you know what they say, the best way to eat an elephant,
A little bit at a time, one bite at a time.
so you got to do the same thing. So what are the reasons why, in your opinion, I'd love to hear this, that SBA loans tend to get delayed?
Excellent question. I feel like there is two or three major ones that always come up, right? Everything else is in place, and then all of a sudden we don't have this. Number one, I'm going to say is leases and landlord waivers. I feel like the sooner that you can get, and I know everything is time sensitive, right? You don't want to, put the cart before the horse or any of that. The sooner we can get working on the lease and the landlord waiver, that is key because that always seems to be something that we're waiting on the last minute for. And then, depending on if the landlord is a property manager, you might not be able to get to that person right away. If it's an individual, it might be a little bit better, or if it's, somebody that's known to the seller. But that is that one comes up quite often. And I tell people all the time, get in front of that. And who's super helpful when doing that is the broker. People like you are the ones that are able to get ahead of that or start working on that in the short term, right? So it's something that you guys can, because you can be speaking, whether you're representing buyer and seller or you're, on one side or the other, you can be speaking to the other side's broker and preparing them and say, hey, listen, we're going to be needing this. We need to, put this, first and foremost. That's something that definitely comes up quite a bit. The other thing I feel like comes up quite a bit is the life insurance. The majority of SBA loans will require life insurance.
On the buyer.
On the buyer, yes, that is correct. And I think that people don't necessarily put as much importance on it as, say, the purchase agreement or something like that, understandably so. But the problem with it is that it takes a while sometimes. And then you have to get the policy, and then we have to put the assignment on the policy. And so if we're not getting the policy till last minute, then there's just another lag time because, sometimes you can get a policy in 5 days and sometimes it's 6 or 8 weeks. It's just who they're using, who they are, if there's issues, if you can't get medical records from doctors, there's so many things that can come into play in that, that if you can start that, I tell people when I'm pre-qualifying them as buyers, start looking. Have a
Wow,
plan for your life
that
insurance
quickly.
because
I
you're
thought
going to need it.
that's very interesting, Tammy. I thought we were pretty aggressive at our company because my closing coordinator
Hmm.
points that out pretty early in the process that you're going to need the life
Hmm.
insurance. Because right, that does hold up. But
Hmm.
you do it much sooner. That's really good. I
Yeah, I
thought
feel
we were
like,
pretty aggressive. You're even more aggressive.
yeah, well, I feel like at that point that gives them, sort of time to shop around. I say, okay, you're looking for a $5 million business. Look for a $5 million loan policy. You might not need a $5 million one, but at least you've done the research so that when you're ready to pull the trigger, you know what you're going to do, you know what to expect, you know what the cost of it's going to be. If you only buy a $2 million business, great, you only need a $2 million policy.
And I want to add to that that they should also be corresponding and talking with their SBA lender when they're dealing with the life insurance policy, because you guys need certain wording and stuff in there, and you
Hmm.
need certain parameters in that. So I think it's just really important that they keep communicating with the lender and not just get the policy done, but you know,
Hmm.
work with the lender.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. That we're here to help. Nobody, we don't ever want to be the part of the spoke in the wheel that's not getting things done. So whatever we can do to help be proactive, lenders will do that. They absolutely
Any,
will.
anything else that you can suggest that slows down a deal typically?
Sometimes what can slow down a deal is if we're working with a franchise, and we need to get a franchise agreement, we need to get some sign off from a franchise. A lot of folks will wait to go and do that until the last minute. And some franchises are great and they're super fast, and some are not. They're a little bit more cumbersome and it takes a little bit longer. So the sooner that you can start working on getting those franchise documents, agreements, any management agreement that you're going to need from a franchise, be doing that. Do those things early. The other piece I would say is have your equity down payment injection ready to go if possible. Have it in a separate account that is easily traceable so that you are not providing, 7 different bank account statements where you transferred, this amount to this amount to this amount, because that's only more frustrating to the borrower. And I tell people even when I'm pre-qualifying them or even at the beginning of the process, if you have it, put it in a separate savings account. Do it now. All you'll have to give us at the closing is one statement that shows it. So I think that's important because a lot of times folks will wait till the last minute to move money around, and then it's just a little bit more documentation that we have to get in order to source that equity or that down payment requirement.
That's great, Tim. That's some good insight. 3 out of the 4 things that you said have something very common, have a common denominator, and I wanted to point it out. That she mentioned the landlord. You mentioned now I can't even remember. You mentioned the landlord. You mentioned the franchisor, and you mentioned getting the insurance done.
Hmm.
We're talking about all third parties.
Yes.
So whenever we are in an SBA loan or in a deal in general, and we're dealing with a third party, that tends to slow down the process. So those are the things you tend to have to be most aggressive about. And I
Hmm.
think slowing down the process, like usually the buyers are very good at getting information, the sellers are decent at getting information. It's usually when you're going to the third party people that
Hmm.
things start to slow down. So the earlier you can attack them, the better. And I think I want to add to that too is that when you're a buyer or seller, or if you're a broker working with a buyer or seller, you've got to get information as quickly as you possibly can, because every time it'll take me a couple days to get this piece of information. It'll take me a couple days to get this information. You add that up between the buyer, you add that up between the seller, the third party people, the
Hmm.
attorneys, the CPAs, unfortunately, brokers, lenders, all that leads to major delays. So I
Yeah.
think being very organized as a seller, being very organized as a buyer, and realizing throughout the process, you're going to have to set some time aside, every day to attack things, even though you may not need to do it every single day. Just be prepared. And it's like anything, like the first few weeks, it's a lot of information that the buyer has to provide, a lot of information the seller has to provide. And then it's a lot of like sitting around
Hmm.
waiting. And then it's like, okay, hurry up and provide some more information type stuff. And
Yeah.
that's kind of like the whole process all the way through. But I know working with myself and my team, and Tammy, I know you guys operate the same way. We start to ask for information before we need it, so that you have more time to get it.
Hmm.
You know, Makes
Yeah.
sense. Like we get that initial information, and we say, okay, well, we know in a couple weeks the lender's going to be asking for this, and that. You may want to start getting that information together, so that when they
Hmm.
say we need this, that, and this, boom, here it is, and we can get it
Hmm.
immediately.
Yeah.
So I think the big part is communicating with your broker and communicating with your SBA lender what you think is going to happen, what's going to be needed next. I think is
Hmm.
important.
Yeah, I tell people a lot of times too, they say to me, okay, how can I make this faster? So what we'll do a lot of times is I will send them a preliminary closing checklist, like on every deal, this is what we need. Now there'll be some nuances with yours that might be deal specific, but every deal is going to need a purchase agreement. Every deal is going to need, insurances. Every deal is going to need this, this, and this, let's start a folder. Let's start a folder for closing while we're underwriting. So when we get a closer, we send her that folder and she's already knocking down that checklist before she even sends it out, or he.
Yeah. There you
So,
go. There
so
you
that's
go.
been helpful.
So, and I know some of the stuff that we cover from time to time, we mention in other videos that we do, but, I think that, we have different topics and we tend to, overlap in some areas. And I think that that is good because it reinforces some of these points,
Hmm.
Tammy.
Yeah,
But,
absolutely.
I guess the second point is when we're talking about trying to speed things up is building the right team, so maybe you can kind of say what you think from that standpoint on building the right
Yeah,
team, how important that is.
absolutely. It's so important to have the right team. And that means a lender. It means the right business broker or representative intermediary, the right counsel, buyer and sellers, the right CPAs, the right insurance agents. Whether it's business insurance or life insurance. All of these people play key roles in number one, due diligence, number two, prudent lending, and number three, protecting the borrower and the seller, throughout the process. And I think that it's important to find those people, make sure you have your professional advisors. But the other important point is make sure they all are getting connected. It's so important early to connect everybody so that we all can be communicating. And I think you said earlier, somebody might be going on vacation, but it's important to tell them that you're going on vacation so they're not expecting, something to be coming through, or we know we're going to be, challenged with a few days while life is happening. But if you don't have the right team in place, we've seen it, you've seen it, it can really derail a deal. And I don't mean that in a negative way, because we always seem to find a solution. But if your counsel is, not an M&A attorney, and you're buying a business, there are so many different law practices that, don't have all the commonalities. And a family law attorney is not going to know about working capital and all the other requirements that go into and what should be in the final purchase agreement. And so working together with someone like you, the intermediary, and the attorneys and buyers and sellers, CPAs, all of those things come together collectively with their expertise. So you need to build the right team. I get people ask me all the time, do you have a recommendation? And I do have folks that I do recommend that I've worked with that have done a good job, and I'll give them a list of names. And I encourage them to call them and interview them all. This is somebody that you're going to be working with, somebody that's going to be looking out for you and for the seller, whatever side that you're on. And it's important that you choose the right person that you feel like you're connecting with and that is going to do that job for you.
And you were talking about, attorneys practice all different types of law and how that's important. You were talking about, using a family attorney to do this kind of transaction is probably not the best thing. It's also, you might have a great business attorney used for business, but are they been involved with a lot of sales of businesses or the acquisitions of businesses? Because I think that's important too. I
Hmm.
think the general business attorney that, does involved in a business sale once every couple of years. I just don't know if they're going to be as good as somebody that this is what they do day in and day out. They specialize in business sales. That's probably more of an attorney that you're going to need, and it's going to be
Hmm.
more capable, On the SBA lending front, it's the same thing. I mean, in any industry you've got out there, brokers, SBA lenders, whatever it is, you've got great people, you've got good people, and you've got bad people. This
Hmm.
isn't the time that you're like, oh, my friend does this, or I know somebody that knows somebody that does this. This is like the time that you should be asking the professionals, hey, somebody that you're dealing with, whether it's myself or the SBA lender, can you give me a couple names of attorney? Can you give me a couple names for a lender, a couple names for brokers? And
Hmm.
get people that are like at the top of their game and are really, really good at what they're doing. This is probably the biggest transaction of your life, whether you're the buyer or the seller up to this point.
Hmm.
So, make sure you really get the good, strong, solid people.
Absolutely. And at the end of the day too, it's a sensitive matter, right? It's personal, right? For both sides. Sellers especially, they built this business, maybe this business has been their life and now they're moving on to something else. And it's an emotional process. So you want to make sure that personalities are right too. I've seen sometimes the personalities don't mesh well and that can be problematic. So, choose the right person that's going to represent you also, and the way that you want to be represented, how people are perceiving that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does, and I think personalities it plays a big, big role
Hmm.
in it. You're going to probably be interacting with these people a lot, so you really have to be able to get along with them very well.
Hmm.
And
Yep.
so I think personality is huge. Another thing is time frame. They
Hmm.
have the time capability to give you what they need to give you.
Yeah.
I recently did a deal where the seller had an attorney that was a very good attorney, but it took forever to get anything back. And we're dealing with very time sensitive deadlines and things like that. That you got to ask these people, are you able to give me the love that you need? Maybe you don't mention it, word it quite that way, but
Yeah.
you're going to give me the time that's required to get this deal done.
Hmm. Yeah, and to your point too, if that attorney has had a European vacation planned for, 2 years, he's going to be gone for a month, might not be the best one to go with. Maybe he is, but does that work for you? That time frame? Yeah, absolutely.
So, Tammy, let's talk about managing logistics and how we might be able to speed things up. That speed up the SBA process that way. And you had touched on a little bit on vacations before, and maybe we can touch more on vacations. But buyers and sellers go on vacations. What do you recommend in regards to vacations and things like that?
Yeah, I think obviously it's important to take vacations. If while this process is going on, if it can wait, that's great. But life can't always wait. But what I encourage people to do when they're thinking about the logistics of finalizing the deal, closing the deal, and getting it finalized so that the seller can spend time with grandbabies and the buyer can start working on his next chapter or her next chapter in life, is to know where and when you're going to be signing paperwork, how you're signing it. Are you going to seller's attorney's office? Who's going to be attending the closing? Are you going to the borrower's attorney's office? Who's going to be attending? Is the seller going to be signing his portion or her portion of the paperwork the day before? Are they going to be docu-signing that? Is it going to be a wet signature? Also important to know that, are we going to need a notary service to go to someone's house for a partial guarantor, related to the collateral that we're taking to sign, or a husband or a wife that might need to sign. And, oftentimes we have mobile notaries for each party, right? Because some multi-state sometimes. But we need to be able to coordinate all of those closing logistics. So it's important to know where everybody's going to be in advance and how they want to handle it. And a lot of times we'll put that kind of on the forefront of when we have our first closing call with our team and the team that we've created and our closing and underwriting team here from like Boca that we've added along the way. And if we know that, we can be booking in advance. And we also will put a preliminary close date on there. So we have a goal. We know what we're working towards. And that way we know we need to have paperwork in-house, all of what we need 5 days prior to that closing to happen. So if we want the closing to happen on the 30th, paperwork's got to be in by the 23rd, right? And so I think that's important to know too. Time frames and logistics of how the closing will happen, where it will where it will happen, and who is going to attend, if at all. I've had instances where everybody was, in a different spot, and we sent a mobile notary here, and then we got the seller signed the day before, and so it's not always where everybody's in a room together signing, but it doesn't mean that we can't do it. It just means we have to plan for it a little bit better, just to make it happen so that it goes smoothly. So I think that's important to know.
Yeah, and as you know, a lot of my closings are virtual, and they've worked out well, and everybody can be anywhere they want to be
Hmm.
to sign the paperwork. I think the time frames is important. Those milestones that, hey, we need
Yes.
to do this by this date, this by that date, and tracking those milestones is extremely important to make sure things get done. And then we can tell, are we ahead of schedule? Are we behind schedule? And we can make those adjustments. But if you don't have those milestones or those time frames laid out up front, I think that's just important you have those. And as
Hmm.
far as vacations, because I did want to touch on that a little bit, if you're buying a business, you're selling a business, I would try to avoid going on a vacation during the closing process. Now, I do understand those family vacations sometimes are planned way far in advance, and they were planned before the business went under contract, and you've got obligations, and no problem with that. And we have, Tammy, we have it all the time where a buyer or seller will go on vacation during that process.
Hmm.
But I think it's important if you're a buyer or seller, or if you're a broker working with a buyer and a seller, and you got somebody that's going on vacation, communicate that to all parties involved. If your
Hmm.
seller's going on vacation, let the buyer know that, let the lender know that, and that way, like, the lender can go, okay, well, they're going on vacation between this date and that date. Well, around this date, we were going to ask for this kind of information because we're going to need it about that time period. So maybe we can ask for that quicker, sooner, before they go on vacation, so we're not
Right.
missing a beat. I think it
Hmm.
comes down to, besides milestones and time frames, is just good communication between all parties involved is
Hmm.
critical. You can't
Really.
over communicate enough, I think.
Hmm. Yep. I
Throughout the
totally
call.
agree. I totally agree. I totally
And
agree.
one of the things that we do is, we have, once we go under contract, we have biweekly calls between the buyer and the seller and ourselves as brokers. And it's just another way to keep everybody informed, checking everybody's time frame. What do you need from so and so by when, and I just think that's really
Hmm.
important.
Yeah.
So, Tammy, I don't want to take too much more of your time. Is there any other thoughts that you want to leave people with, brokers, buyers, sellers, about how we can speed up the process?
I think I would just kind of reiterate what we've talked about. Be prepared. Ask questions. Ask a lot of questions. This is a big deal. Make sure you've got the right team. I can't stress that enough. But definitely, there's going to be questions, and you're not supposed to, or not you, but the borrower, the buyer, the seller, they're not supposed to have all the answers. But we're always here to be a resource. And if I leave you or your audience with anything, whether you do business with Live Oak or not, I think I've said this to you before. We're always happy to be a resource to you as a broker, to buyers, to sellers, to walk you through the process, to let you know what the expectations are, what the requirements are. I'm not saying you can or you can't do one thing or the other if that's how you want to structure your seller note, but I can tell you if it's an eligible use of what the SBA will allow. And that will help you to make some determinations on, okay, do you want to change the language to make it work for you? Or are you just going to say, I'm going to have to find a buyer that doesn't use SBA financing? And maybe that is something that they need to know and to figure out. But we're always here for the small business community and the broker community to lean on as a resource to help you all either move on in life or get deals closed, because ultimately that's the goal for everybody.
Yeah, Tammy, you're saying, sellers might say, hey, I need somebody that's going to be all cash that's not doing SBA lending. I think that if you're a business owner and you got an enterprise value of $750,000 to $2 or $3 million, if you said to me, yeah, let's find a buyer that's all cash, I probably wouldn't take the listing, because what would end up happening is we would narrow down that buyer field so much.
Mm-hmm.
It'd be like many times finding a needle in a haystack. And obviously, you're trying to sell your business. You're trying to maximize your sales price. You're trying to get the best terms
Of
you
course.
possibly can. And the only way to do that is open it up to as big of a buyer pool as you possibly can. And I'm telling you, that SBA lending between that $750,000 or even a $500,000 up to a $2 or $3 million enterprise value, chances are whoever buys that business is going to be doing SBA lending. And
Mm-hmm.
you know, I don't really think, it takes about 90 days from the time you go under contract till the time we can close. And I feel like that 90 days, and that's for most part is 90 days, and we could probably get it done quicker. But at the same time, the seller's trying to run their business. The buyer might have they might still be
Mm-hmm.
working their job. It's just knowing what things we're going to need in advance, and getting that information gathered up and put together before the underwriter asks for it, or before the person that needs it asks for it. That information is already put together, and here it
Mm-hmm.
is.
Yep.
You know?
Absolutely.
But
Absolutely. Start a folder, make a file.
yeah,
That's
exactly.
where you start it.
Yeah, start picking away. So, anything else, Tammy? One last thought. That was really
You
good information, so I'm throwing it back at you.
well, it's always a pleasure. I thank you so much for inviting me to join you, Jim. And I'm always happy to answer any questions that anybody has. And do whatever I can for any one of you. So,
Yeah, please reach out to Tammy. You'll see her contact information underneath of her, and please reach out to her anytime. She's a fantastic person. She is extremely knowledgeable when it comes to SBA lending. She's just phenomenal. So, you had any questions at all, you can just reach out to her. Guys, I really appreciate you watching Let's Chat today. I hope you got some good information out of it. Until next time, take care.